I have owned and carried the Ruger RXM since I purchased it back in February, and it's probably my favorite gun in 2025. And in this video, I want to give you my honest thoughts about the Ruger RXM, what I do, what I don't like about it, especially after having carried it almost every single day, and how I think it performs out on the range. Now, I purchased the Ruger RXM to go alongside my everyday carry with the Hellcat Pro. I wanted something that was just slightly larger and could flex into that space of home defense, concealed carry, and just something I enjoyed shooting out on the range. More specifically, I was attracted to the fact that I feel like Ruger and Magpul fixed all of the things that I just didn't like about the original Glock 19. Plus, with the fire control insert, it means that you get a world of possibilities, especially as time goes on and companies catch up. It means you're going to have the option for a barrel slide frame combination, such as the G26, the 43X, 17, the list goes on and on. And since I just started this channel, I would love to make more reviews for you all. This video will probably never be monetized. Please subscribe, give it a thumbs up. Anything to help the algorithm goes a long way. I also love the fact that Magpul adjusted the Glock grip angle, so it's no longer that 22-degree cant. It's more along the lines of your traditional 1911. And in this case, it means that I don't have to cant my wrists more than I typically do with all of my other firearms when I shoot the RXM, which I think this alone makes it really attractive for people who want the reliability and the customization of Glock, but don't want to have to switch their technique on a different platform. And another big benefit of the RXM is going to be the compatibility with Glock Gen 3 parts. And in my opinion, because Glock really hasn't innovated much, they don't typically stray outside of their core platforms. It's created this market where there is a ton of aftermarket upgrades and optionality, whether it be you want to update the trigger, the barrel, the slide, if you want to mill it, if you want to put an optic, if you want a mag well, you kind of get my point. Now in this case, I've not done any updates to my RXM except swap out the frame from the original gray to the OD green, just because it matched the Magpul furniture of my AR and I thought it looked really cool. I then added the HoloSun 407K on it and the Streamlight TLR7X. Eventually, I do want to swap out the barrel to the AIM Surplus Just the Tip barrel. However, for now, it shoots great and I really like it. And if you are familiar with Glock style triggers, the RXM has a Glock style trigger. Maybe marginally better than the Gen 3, but it's a little worse than the Gen 5 Glocks. And in this case, you're still going to get that rolling break. It's going to be pretty spongy, and it just is what it is. But honestly, after shooting it for a while, and especially compared to the Hellcat Pro, it's got a good enough trigger. And I'll finish this section by saying there are a lot of other things I like about the RXM. In this case, I really like the integrated magwell. I love the universal mounting pattern that they did with the optics plate system. And I think the grip texture is really solid. It gives you a really solid purchase on the firearm, but it's not overly aggressive, especially when I am carrying all day. At this point, I put roughly around 750 rounds through the RXM, and I really like the way it shoots. I've actually really bonded with this gun in a way I wasn't super expecting. First and foremost, I think just because of the size of this platform and just the magwell, it really helps push my hand back up into the trigger well, and the extended beaver tail really just helps me get a really confident grip on the firearm where I feel like I can handle the recoil and manage it really, really well. And I do find that the Ruger RXM is super fun and easy to shoot. I think it's just big enough to conceal and hide well enough underneath clothing, but it's also big enough for me to feel comfortable getting a strong grip on the platform and being able to shoot it confidently. This is also where I really appreciate the more traditional grip angle of the RXM over a Glock. In this case, I don't have to get used to a different cant on my wrist and readjust the way I acquire my sights when I switch from platform to platform. In this case, the RXM feels like every other polymer striker fire pistol that I own, and I like that because it means when I go to the range or in a self-defense situation, I know right where I need to go, and that muscle memory is already ingrained. Now, to move along to some of the negatives of this firearm, I will say initially when I purchased it, I did notice with the original barrel that it had some tooling or kind of barrel marks inside of it. And in this case, I reached out to Ruger, and with pretty much no questions asked, they just sent me a new one. So kudos to Ruger there. The other con that I will say is I do notice a bit of a tolerance issue with the way the slide interacts with the Magpul frames. In this case, I do find that there's this little bit of a gap, no matter if I use the original gray frame I have or the updated gray frame that Ruger sent me when I complained about it, or the aftermarket OD green one that I purchased from Magpul. All of them kind of have the same gap where the front of the barrel and the slide are going to be a little bit separated from the actual frame, more so than I've seen in any other polymer type handgun. Hopefully as time goes on, Ruger figures out how to tighten up their tolerances and the quality control there. But past that, I've not had a single malfunction. I've not had any issues with the firearm past that, and it's shot just awesome. Now, unfortunately, I'm probably not the best sample size because when I go to the range, I typically just buy 115, 124 grain brass from Blazer. And in this case, because it's already pretty good ammo, I've not really had any issues. And I'm not really trying to buy cheap ammo to induce a malfunction because I'm there to just have fun and shoot and enjoy what I'm doing. Lastly, I will say there is an initial break-in period of around 300 pounds. I also did do an internal polish of some of the parts and just that 25-cent Glock kind of trigger job that you see online. And that did help kind of crisp things up a little bit. But just know that if you decide to purchase this firearm, give it a couple hundred rounds and that trigger will start to smooth out more and more. Now, as far as concealing the RXM, this is definitely going to be different for each person. In this case, I am 6'1", I weigh around 185 pounds, and I've got more of a tall, kind of ectomorphic style build, which just means larger handguns are going to be harder for me to conceal. In this case, I would say the RXM is super easy for me to conceal in normal fall, winter clothes, and quite frankly, almost anyone can carry a giant gun whenever you've got tons of layers to hide the firearm. The real challenge really just comes down to summer and warmer months, and in this case, when you're wearing shorts and a t-shirt and being able to hide that confidently. In this case, I do have a sidecar appendix holster for my RXM, which does allow me to conceal the RXM, my TLR7X, and an extra 15-round magazine. This is definitely a bulky setup to begin with, and eventually I plan to buy just a dedicated holster for the RXM, slim up things a little bit more. However, I can say I do feel like I conceal the RXM well, even with a relatively tight fitting shirt. In this case, having a concealment claw on the holster definitely helps, and then also just wearing darker colors. And let's be honest, most people, almost everyone, will never ever notice if you are printing. They're too busy looking at their phones. Now, if I do find that the outfit that I'm wearing, it just doesn't work, I'll typically switch to the Hellcat Pro. And I also just bought the Canik Mete MC9 for something even smaller as well. Now, pivoting to home defense, I think the RXM is a spectacular option. In this case, it's why I mounted the TLR7X on my handgun. And I know right off the bat, that is going to be polarizing because some people think you shouldn't have a weapon mounting light. Some people do. In this case, I always carry a flashlight on me every single day, which would be my first line of instinct is to grab that if I ever need. And then in a self-defense situation, I have it on my firearm if I need it. And I do keep my firearms locked up because I've got young kids at home. So is the Ruger RXM worth buying? In my opinion, absolutely. I think it's close to one of the best bang for buck options out there on the market right now. And in this case, you can typically find the RXM for roughly $375, sometimes less, sometimes a little more. Ruger also just added a threaded barrel option, so if you want to add a suppressor or a compensator, you can for just a little bit more. I also do think the modularity of the platform creates a ton of value for people, and as companies start to offer more slides and barrels and frame combinations, you're going to be able to have even more options, create a PCC, a PDW, all while having the same one serialized part. I also just think having aftermarket availability and the access to a ton of additional parts for the RXM, it's going to mean that no matter who you are, you can find what you want, whether it's upgrading the trigger or the sights, etc. And lastly, I think the RXM is the perfect Glock for people who don't like Glock. The RXM offers a ton of upgrades over the original Glock 19 Gen 3 and even the Gen 5 right out of the box. And because of the improvements with the grip angle, I think more people will be willing to step into the RXM than have to learn a new technique and adjust the way they cant their wrists with what Glock has to offer. So with all that said, what are your thoughts? Did you buy the RXM? And if not, what have you bought instead? And if you are curious on what an $800 handgun gets you, watch this next video on the Walther PDP Pro. I'll see you guys next time.